I'm Simon Armitage, and you're listening to The Poet Laureate Has Gone to His Shed. It's a shed tucked away in the Pennine Hills where all year I've been trying to write haiku, those finicky, fiddly little three-line poems about nature and the weather that look so simple but are almost impossible to perfect. So, to be honest, any kind of intrusion or distraction is very welcome from anyone kind or curious enough to call in for a natter. At some point in the future, I imagine we'll be able to plug our brains into a hard drive and download all the thoughts we've ever had, including all the songs we've hummed in our head or sung along to. And if that's the case, my guest in the shed today will be responsible for a large part of my personal content, because sitting opposite me is musician and singer, and perhaps most famously guitarist and songwriter with the Smiths, Johnny Marr. Johnny, welcome to the shed.
Hi Simon, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome to Yorkshire.
Well, I really did pick a good day for it, didn't I? I mean, if people could see this, it's kind of incredible view you've got here.
Do you know this part of the world at
Not
all?
really, no. I mean, when I was a kid, a whole load of us all lived in this community, in a city really, Manchester. And then in the early 70s, we all got relocated, spread around, and a few of my relatives moved up towards this way. But I think the furthest I got was Staley Bridge, I think. So out sort of from between Manchester and Sheffield. I was a real kind of inner city kid, so it was a little bit, might as well have been the Amazon really for me, you know, at the time.
It is the Amazon sometimes.
Yeah, and I didn't realise it was so close to Wakefield, because when I was, you know, with the Cribs for a few years, that was our spiritual home place, really.
And I don't want to reignite the War of the Roses here,
Yeah.
but you know, or ask you if you had to leave your weapons at the border. Or, but which way did you come? Did you come on the motorway?
Yeah, I came through like from South Manchester, Blossom, all of that.
Okay, yeah. Because I always think it's interesting, you know, to get from here to Manchester. There's two ways really. You can either go on the M62, and it's that bit of the motorway. I think it's described as the highest motorway in Britain. It's a strange claim to fame, but you know where the motorway splits,
Yeah.
and there's a farm in the middle,
Oh,
and and there's a subway underneath where the farmer brings his cows and his sheep into the middle of the carriageway. Or the other way, and I think this might be the way that you've come, is across Saddleworth Moor.
That is the way I came, yeah.
Yeah.
Very beautiful today. I mean, it's always very, very atmospheric and very vibey. It's a kind of amazing part of the country. Usually it's dramatic in a different way, isn't it?
Well, it's quite haunting, isn't it? I mean, you say Saddleworth Moor to a lot of people, and they immediately think of Hindley, Brady, because you know the Smiths had a song, "Suffer Little Children."
Yeah, God, we're into that pretty quick, aren't we? But that's actually that's quite appropriate, because that song was written on our first ever songwriting session. It was the second song that we wrote, and therefore about 20 minutes into our songwriting career, because the first one took about 17 minutes, and then I would have stopped to have had at least one cigarette, and then we did another one. So we were off to the races pretty quickly. And I was 18 then, I think. That's when me and Morrissey first got together. So our first songwriting session was the second time we'd met properly.
How did you meet Morrissey? How did that collision occur?
From 14, 15, I was always in bands, and some friends put a band together, and Morrissey was in that band for a really short time, and he was a name that stuck in my mind. I sort of knew about everything that was going on around Manchester, you know. So he's a name that was around from a few years before we actually met. That's my point. And we got actually introduced to each other really briefly at a Patti Smith gig in 1978. But anyway, so when I came to actually form the Smiths, I was looking for group members. I'd remembered this guy Morrissey, and that he was a singer, and he'd seemed to have gone kind of quiet for a long time. I hadn't heard anything about him, and so I sought him out eventually with a bit of detective work, got his address, and then as soon as I got the address, I hopped on the bus one sunny day, very memorable day, partly because it was sunny in Manchester, and with this pal, and I went and knocked on his door. You know, you like that when you're young. It just didn't occur to me that he might not actually be there, or that family might have moved. I was just sort of like, okay, hey, this is destiny. Amazing. Well, when you open this door, your life is about to change. And that is exactly what happened. And so he invited me to his bedroom, and, you know, so he's just going about his day. And then the door goes, and then this little hyperactive fella just goes. But we just had this sort of kind of cosmic recognition, I think. I mean, it was definitely a moment that I knew was going to be important in my life.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, before I got on the bus, or when I had this piece of paper in my hand in this blazing, you know, that real dazzling sunshine that's too bright.
In Manchester.
In Manchester.
It was clearly a dream.
And I was exactly, it's fiction. And I was looking down at this address, and it was like frozen in time. And yeah, probably a few days later, maybe a week later, we ended up in my little attic, and then I sat on the floor cross-legged, and I did the first song. He produced some words. That was On That Rocks the Cradle, and then the second one's the song you're talking about, with Tough Little Children. So within 25 minutes of us kicking off on this odyssey, mission, spiritual life journey, and writing a song about Moors murders, and I think the line that most struck me though was, at that time, was Manchester so much to answer for, you know, because that was like a mini little, turned out to be a bit of a manifesto in itself, really. It definitely stood out, and being so young and everything, I was sort of going, oh right, okay, this is what we are. It's not really the usual fare. It's
interesting you sitting there in front of me saying that, because as I look at you, Saddleworth Moor is running through your mind. It's the backdrop behind us. I mean, it was quite dark stuff, wasn't it, really, to be getting into it at that stage?
Speaking for myself, the group that I was intending on forming was a serious group anyway. And I can't really divorce that from the times, because being young and working in a clothes shop in town and running around and all of that, most of my sort of persona and my life was very upbeat and very happy. But as a sort of, you know, a modern musician and a very almost militant, you know, very opinionated and serious musician, the vibe of an 18-year-old musician at that time forming a modern group with a stranger, which is what I was doing, there was a sort of implicit kind of understanding that what we were doing was serious. It wasn't trite music. You know, I haven't played this probably since then.
You're sending shivers down my spine there, because the first time I heard those notes and those chords, I was sitting in my student bedroom at Portsmouth Poly, quite homesick, and the village where I'd grown up, Marsden, which is not far from here, looked out onto Saddleworth Moor. And I'm not saying I was nostalgic for Saddleworth Moor, but I was nostalgic for this part of the world, and I was looking for a band to adore who represented something northern and sang about things that I knew. And I remember, you know, buying the first album and listening to that. And also, you know, later I became a probation officer in Manchester, and, you know, the Moors Murder still cast, literally, on some occasions with the Moors, a long shadow across that city.
I wrote my autobiography a few years ago, and in part of thinking, you know, when I got to thinking about myself at 7, 8, 9, you had to sort of mention it. So what, 7, 8, 9, that would have been 1971, 72 for me. One of the kids lived in the same, if not the same street, or a few doors down from my gran, where I used to go and hang out there. So part of my consciousness as a little boy in the late 60s, early 70s in the Northwest was seeing those photos, seeing the name, you know, and I didn't have to think very much about whether I was going to include it. I mean, it was just in passing, but it definitely was part of the sort of landscape and the psychogeography of the place. That was the first time I got but adults whispering it, trying to keep it away from me and my sister and my cousins, and you sort of seeing the fleeting images and hearing about it on the radio. It was the first time I had a sense of depravity. That was the thing. I mean, you're already aware of danger, but there was a new thing that came into your...
It was off the scale.
Into your consciousness. That's what it was. It's sort of depravity, really. But I haven't played this song since we recorded it on the record. But if I think about those chords, so if you're asking me about that first songwriting session, if I play the... I must have had kind of a lot on my mind.
I'm just keep having to remind myself that Johnny Marr is playing guitar in my shed. Just staying with geography, Johnny, and psychogeography and music. What is it about Manchester? I mean, have you got some secret over there, or is there something in the water? There's a hill up at the top of the road here called West Nab, and I've stood up there and I've sort of done a 360 on the trig point and looked all around. A lot of my sort of writing inspirations and influences and references come from this side, from the Yorkshire side and elsewhere, but all the music that I was listening to when I was growing up, and to some extent still listen to, comes from Manchester.
Yeah.
Particularly, from the late 70s onwards. Why have you sort of cornered the market, do you think?
I think a lot of it's to do with working class entertainment and the history and legacy of working class entertainment. So in my case, and say in the case of the Gallaghers, Noel particularly, and say, Manny from the Roses, we came from immigrant families, I mean all the Smiths in fact.
You're talking about from Ireland predominantly? Yeah,
my family are all from Kildare, Southern Ireland, and they all moved over very early 60s, 61, 62.
Because your name originally is actually spelt M-A-H-A-R, is that right?
Yeah, M-A-H-E-R, same as the drummer of the Buzzcocks, which is one of the reasons why I felt I had to change it. Sort of very strong sense of destiny, I was sort of 15. Anyway, what rubbed off on me was not only their enthusiasm and pretty much their obsession for music, which they still have to this day, my parents, but the awareness of the club scene, the Ardrey, where all the show bands played, and this thing about going out to let off some steam and be part of a sort of community as well. But I don't think that was just exclusive to immigrants either. I think all areas of Manchester, say a band like The Fall, say for example, so you go back a century or whatever, 8 decades, and you've really got to talk about the Industrial Revolution. So the promise of work and the industry that went on for, I guess, a century and a half, how it drew people from all over the world, but particularly areas of Europe. And then those people were working people, and working people, say the Irish, for example, are not really that dissimilar from the Eastern Europeans in that a lot of them grew up in villages, and a lot of them made their own music in their kitchens with their brothers and sisters and aunties and uncles and grandparents for entertainment and I think psychic kind of stealth, and they brought that with them, and they just acted it's in the DNA really of working people. It's not just about escapism. I think it's a lot to do with community and a lot to do with, and also a lot of these people were really talented. I mean, I grew up around a lot of aunties. A lot of them could really sing, with a real kind of sadness and emotive quality, and I was a little kid watching all of this.
And without feeling self-conscious or embarrassed about it.
Oh no, they couldn't wait to get going.
Yeah.
Especially after several drinks. But that was magical to me, and in a way, look, it was quite intense, really. But I loved that, and that's definitely in, some of those chord changes are in that kind of melancholy thing, really.
And the folk tradition there. Are you still a city person? I mean, a lot of people, as they grow older, gravitate towards the countryside, I've noticed. But I think of you as sort of urban through and through.
Yeah, although, you've caught me at a week where I'm pondering about being on the cusp now, just because the cities are changing so much and really are now really becoming sort of homogenised, if that's the word. Because pre-COVID times and hopefully fairly soon again, I get to see so much of the UK particularly, because I like touring around the UK and I like going to, Hastings, and I like going to Dundee, and I like going to all these places that I used to go to with the Smiths. Really, I still like that, and I get out and about and I see it, but they are starting to look quite alike, cities. But really, you're entirely right. Like 99% of who I am, and do you know what? I kind of protected it in a way. Really, I nurtured it. I mean, both my children are grown up now, but we almost brainwashed them into having Saturday jobs in the city centre, to have had that experience of being townies. Because as a little child, my local shops were the city centre. Looking back, I was going to say I romanticised it, but I romanticised it at the time while it was happening. I was a fairly sort of romantic, or sort of, I don't know, sort of artistic kind of kid. So I do. It's a bit too late for me to not regard cities as magical, particularly UK cities, I think.
Well, the house next door is up for sale, by the way. I think you'd make a good neighbour. You'd be very welcome, Johnny.
Sounds good.
You could come round for a cup of sugar.
I'd have to have one of these sheds. I like this place.
One of the things that we always end up talking about in the programme is, creativity, making things. This is my sort of cottage industry. This is where I make my things. I'm writing little haiku poems at the moment. So that's the test. That's the task that I've set myself this summer. But I wanted to ask you a sort of bigger and slightly abstract question, possibly because you've got your guitar in your hand there. But where do songs come from? Where do tunes come from?
I like that it's half divine inspiration and half craft. I think craft's got a lot going for it, and is not near as dry and unemotional as people might imagine. It is a thing, that Picasso quote, inspiration does exist, but it has to find you working, or the way Hockney put it, the muse exists, but she doesn't visit the lazy. So, you'll know that from writing, that a lot of people have this idea about songwriting, that you descend the stairs in your dressing gown and you sit at a piano or an acoustic guitar and you look wistfully out of the window, and before you've had your coffee, and then you write a song. Well, I wish that was the case. Maybe some people do that, but I think that I can't imagine it be music that would be particularly interesting. There's a lot of misconceptions about writing songs, but I like that there's a craft involved
and a sort of work ethic.
The work ethic, exactly, yeah, and all the
industry.
stuff you. Thank you. Yeah, I was drifting off there, looking at the hills. But there's this Smith song, "Since I've Got My 12 string," that goes. When I picked up the guitar, I did that. It was actually a day in the studio. We needed a song.
That was half a person.
Yeah. And then I went
lazy,
back.
call me shy, is it?
So my fingers just did that, and then my fingers, without thinking, went. My brain was completely not engaged at any point in that process. Of course, you have to be able to actually put some chords together and know those chords to do it. But it was definitely like, if you're into school and you have to sit down, say, at 11 or 12, and you have to write a story. Most of us will know that thing of like, this is a bit of a chore. Maybe not for someone like yourself because you were more drawn to words, but this is a bit of a chore, and you sit down. But how many of us have actually, once we've got into it, off you go, and these connections are made, and you get into, what this modern idea of what's called flow. It's a fantastic feeling. It's really good. And when you sat down to do that, I'm talking at 11 or 12, that happened to me often when I was a bit like, I could do it playing football or whatever, playing the guitar. But it's funny how often you look back and you remember those things because you feel good about that endeavour.
Yeah. Also the pressure as well. I mean, you're reminding me of sort of commissioned work. So I get commissioned occasionally to write poems, and my first response is, how do I do that? I'm not, immediately drawn to that subject. I don't know the language of that subject, but somehow the pressure and the frame and the template that comes with it, once you start working within those boundaries, is part of the creative process. It becomes a challenge, and then the finished poem is somehow the solution. I mean, do you think you could respond to a commission if somebody said to you, we want you to write this song for this particular reason? Would that suit your approach to composition?
Yeah, I think what you've just said is exactly right. I recognise that. I do like a challenge, and I think I've got enough about me professionally. I honour the idea of being a professional musician, and I feel fortunate to be able to do it. Now, whether it would be inspired is a different matter. But you have to have the vocabulary, though. You have to, in my case, you have to be able to...
Yeah, that probably helps, doesn't it?
Well, that's having the vocabulary, and that's how, I don't know what it is, but, that's playing the way you feel,
Was, just going back to the Smiths and, making the music, and you were talking about those early writing sessions, is it generally correct to say that Morrissey would supply the lyrics to your musical compositions? Was that the order in which it happened?
Yeah, very early days, he presented me with words on paper for the early songs. But then I think really quickly we moved on to just getting together, and we couldn't really wait. It couldn't come quick enough. We were like, oh yes, let's write a few tomorrow. And we fell into this thing of writing batches of 3, which is a really good number. I know there's a lot of esoteric ideas about, but it is a good, very practical number. If you just concentrate on one, you get too myopic and you're trying to build a Taj Mahal. If you do 2, you can finish at 2. Three's good. You've got a few. You've got some variation.
What do you say? Make them laugh, make them cry, bring on the dancing horses.
Entirely, yeah, exactly. It's a good number. So we did that, but I think what happened was so I would be carrying around some ideas that I had pretty much fully formed, that I thought would work, and just always doing my homework really, and just always having riffs, So early days, you're taking me back now really, Simon, but very rarely. So say something like, I haven't played these songs in honestly 30 odd years, but Jeane, say, I had that riff. And I just thought, yeah, it's really cool. Well, it's right. So in a couple of days, I'll play that to Moz,
Is that Sandy Shaw cooing away in the back of that track?
No, not on our version, but we did a version with Sandy. Yeah. So I would have had that, and then we got together in a room, as close as we are now, and I put on this little recorder I had, and he went, okay, well, I've got this. And as I was putting it down, I could sense his excitement and my excitement. And then I think I had this riff for... something like that. I think that was the same session. So that's how it would go, and what was cool for me was that if I would leave some of them if they weren't quite finished, if there was a mid-late or whatever, that excitement or inspiration or what would just make me kind of finish it off, So we'd always walk away from a session with 3 really good bits of music, and then he had, like myself, he had a few ideas floating around, so he would have gone, oh, Accept Yourself is a good title. I'll put that on the second thing Johnny did, or I've got this idea for this concept, Jeane, and what we've just done this afternoon, I'll marry that to that. So that was his part of the process. So it was very it was very complimentary what we were doing really right out of the gate, I think.
I think, what struck me about the Smiths from the minute I heard the first records was that it was just this combination of extraordinary guitaring and extraordinary lyrics, these two things in combination that somehow came together but were also pulling apart as well. I remember I once interviewed Mike Joyce, your drummer, obviously, he was. And I talked to him about this charming man, and I was talking to him about the incredible sort of guitar chords and chord sequences and what that meant to me, and the sort of homoerotic lyrics and the detail in the song, and he just stared sort of through me and said, I just thought it was a good beat, really.
Yeah.
But there was something extraordinary going on at that time that presumably you and Morrissey recognised as you were making the songs.
Well, I guess it was like two people who had very, it's sounding modest, but very rich agendas, I guess. It wasn't enough for either of us in our own area to do something that was 50%. I guess what I thought I was doing was 100% rather than 50, and so maybe you end up with 200%, whereas the ordinary songwriting, you get the maths. You know where I'm going with this. But yeah, because I guess, you describe it that way. I think there was this, I think probably also because we didn't know each other when we first started. We hadn't spent years kind of complimenting each other. He was, I guess, for what he wanted to do, he was fully formed. And what I wanted to do, I was fully formed. So as I say, you had these, you're saying like, I can't remember how you put it, maybe like push and pull or didn't quite fit or disconnection. Well, I suppose that to me it was like just two very rich agendas on top, and that seemed to kind of work in an unusual way. It wasn't just like a regular group, because we didn't write, most groups doing the kind of music that I do and still do, it sounds like four people in a room jamming, and I never was into jamming. I tried it when I was about 13, 14, I just found it very unsatisfying and unfocused, and I was just too, I don't know, it just was all, I was like, oh God, it's going to take us, well, we need to play on the same chord change for 4 days, I was like, listen, just give me 10 minutes and I'll just try and turn it into a song. But I do like the thing with rock music, and so, what's become indie music, when it's done very well, say a band like Fontaines DC, they sound like, what they are, they sound like something's been cooked up in an afternoon, and the words are on the top
as well,
oh yeah, there's passion in there. But I sort of try and craft that myself now, and always did.
By the way, I don't know whether you can hear it over there, there's a frog croaking in the background, which is going to bring us to the next part of the programme in a minute. But completely incidentally, I just wanted to say that, I don't want to turn this into Top Gear or anything, but in terms of your navigation skills, you've got closer to my shed without ringing up saying where are you than anyone else.
That's what usually happens.
Yeah, so you get highly commended for that. I could talk about cars and motoring with people all day long. In fact, I'm just remembering, I interviewed Morrissey once, and at the end of the interview I said to him, got one more question, and he said to me, well, you better make it a good one. And I said, can you drive? And he said to me, do you think that's a very good question? And I said, yeah, I'm genuinely interested. And he said, why? Do you think it's because I'm incapable of handling large pieces of machinery?
It's a very good question.
So I was very impressed to see you pulling down the drive there.
It's a total fluke, because if you ask a lot of people who know me, they'll be amazed that I actually, that I've won the prize, the Top Gear prize.
Was that Atlas
driver than I am.
So in the shed over the summer, I've set myself the task of writing these little 17-syllable poems, these little Japanese traditional haiku, and they're interesting poems because I can come out here and I can almost will myself into writing one. They're usually about the seasons and nature and so on and so forth, but one of the most famous haiku poems is by 17th century Japanese poet Basho, and it's about a frog jumping into a pond. So to introduce this next section, you can either choose, Johnny, the frog noise or the frog jumping into the pond noise. Which would you like?
It's a no-brainer. It's the frog jumping into the pond.
Okay, let's see how this goes.
No, my mind went to other things, I must confess.
Okay, Okay, so this is the one or the other section, all right, where I'm just going to give you lots of alternatives, and you can choose which one you prefer. Okay.
Yeah.
Night or day?
Night.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
The Beatles or the Stones?
The Beatles.
Cash or card?
Cash.
Morrissey or Martin? No, I'm joking. That's Lennon or McCartney? It's a tough one, isn't it?
Well, it is, I tell you what, it's really tough because I'm not trying to be cryptic, but I think Harrison.
Okay. Yep, I'm going to allow you that. Hatful of Hollow or The Queen is Dead?
Queen is Dead.
A Journey to the End of the Universe or A Journey to the Centre of the Earth?
Journey to the centre of yourself.
You're too good at this. A good book or a good film?
Good book.
Right-handed or left-handed?
Right-handed.
Suede or leather?
Well, don't know. I don't really like either, but suede.
Kit Kat or Aero? These are the big philosophical ones coming up now.
Do you know, I mean, anyone who says aero is just shouldn't be allowed to live. What's wrong with these people?
Fender Telecaster or Rickenbacker 330?
Ricky 330, yeah.
Joy Division or The Fall?
Joy Division.
Bath or shower?
Shower.
Sergio Aguero or Colin Bell?
Oh, Colin Bell.
Less or more?
Less.
And lastly, there's three choices here actually. The past or the future or the present?
The present. Yeah, some of those, wow. Deep shit, Simon.
I was getting slightly anxious when you were on your way over because it occurred to me that, you know, as a musician and with the band that you played in, you're so revered that there can hardly be any questions that you haven't been asked. So rather than, you know, tearing myself in two trying to think of new questions, I'm going to ask a question which you must have been asked a million times, but I'm still interested in the answer. What is your favourite Smiths song?
It's last night I dreamt somebody loved me, because there's drama in it, there's passion in it. It doesn't sound like any other rock band. I don't think. It's almost operatic. Yes, and it's intense, you know, but it's still rock music. It could only been done by us, you know. I could apply those kind of, you know, judgments on, you know, some Joy Division music that could only be done by them, and why they come to mind is I think it sounds like it's from the north of England.
Am I right in saying as well that was from the last album?
Yeah.
And you'd split up really when Strange Ways Here We Come came out, hadn't you?
I think so. Yeah.
So do you think it's slightly tinged with a little bit of melancholy, that song as well?
Well, the song is anyway, because, you know, when I came up with it, I can't remember, it's on a 12 string, might be better. So they're the chords.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I was on the bus and I came up with that.
On the bus with your guitar or just on the bus in your head?
No, I was actually on an actual bus. We'd come out of a hotel, having played a gig somewhere up north, being in Scotland, and everyone was waiting. You know, just a seemingly an ordinary day, but I just fell into a bit of a kind of emotional hole, which, you know, I was often, less so these days, but still part of my character, you know, sort of, and want to do really. And I liked it. It was weird. It was a kind of like sadness that I liked. This. And I was just like, that's how I feel. The record, it blew up, speaking for myself personally. Well, first of all, I think it's an example of everyone in the band being just brilliant. all of us being great and being a great ensemble. So the bass is amazing, the drums are amazing, the singing and the words are amazing, and the guitar's amazing.
And very practiced by that time, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I'm proud of that, proud of everyone in the group. But for speaking personally, because it started off with me having those feelings, the record, when I hear it, regardless of the words, is just my feelings blown up on a gothic scale. So if anyone thinks they like that song, I like it more.
Have you ever written poetry?
Yeah, and I sometimes still do in my way. Yeah, as you will know, there is a demarcation between poetry and songwriting. Poetry doesn't often, in my experience, make for a good song, and vice versa.
No, I agree.
Just because of what a song is, for me, that's one of the things that makes the words in songs just so fantastic. That thing that they have to fit with the music, or they have to contrast the music, or they have to do that thing with the music. They have to sound right coming out of that person's mouth. Another thing about these ideas about songwriting is some people might think the more profound a lyric and the more heartfelt and the more earnest, therefore, the better it is. Well, that is just not the case. I mean, it's off the top of my head, Franz Ferdinand. Well, do you wanna? Well, do you wanna go? You want that to happen with the music. You don't want some profound kind of thought, some analysis.
Yeah.
And that goes the same right the way through pop music. I mean, when I was a kid in school, Blondie, I thought off the top of my head, Union City Blues, say, Blondie were a big pop group. When that song starts out, what are we gonna do? Union City Blue. It's fantastic, and it's poetic, and it works with the music, and it sounds right. Debbie Harry singing it. You don't want some exposition, and all of those things. You can go on and on. Are great about songs.
I completely agree. I mean, we know, don't we, that yeah or la 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 can be a wonderful moment, a transcendent moment in a record if it's put with the right sound, and it comes with this stuff called music, which is often made by this thing here that you've got in your hand that we can't really explain to ourselves. It's there's something ineffable about a guitar.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, I watched a film once about the cellist Jacqueline Dupre. It's about her life story, and at one point, she's this amazing classical musician, but at one point she gets so, I don't really know how to describe it, sort of fed up with her instrument. She takes it outside the hotel room and puts it on the balcony at night and shuts the window. You've been lugging something like this guitar around pretty much all of your life. Is it always a friend, or is it sometimes an enemy, or is it a comfort?
No, it is always a friend and a comfort and all of those things, because one of the things that's occurred to me over the years is that for me it helped me to be sociable, because I met strangers from other housing estates, different parts of Wythenshawe, who wanted me to play with them and sort of sort me out, and vice versa. So it helped make friends, but also, and more importantly, for me, being a very sort of, on the face of it, quite social person, it was a way that I could get away as well. So it's the equivalent of me having a journal, really, and putting my own private thoughts down. It's a way of me being very private.
That's really interesting.
And it's really served that purpose for me. It's done both things. It made me get friends, but it also made me keep my own distance as well. So literally, I'd be climbing on a building site, because I grew up on this. All these houses were being built around me, and that was like this amazing sort of playground for a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, whatever. But I would just, without any warning, just disappear and then go home and just be working out chords and just sit there for hours and just with my own thoughts. So it's a way of me. It's kind of meditative in a way.
What's interesting to me about what you're saying is that the guitar is both a sort of an icebreaker and a kind of cupid and a way of getting to know people, but if you want it to be, it's also a barrier. I mean, it is a physical barrier. It stands between you and other people if you need that to happen.
Yeah. I found over the years that, if I'm in hotel rooms, when I was doing a lot of interviews, when I was younger, people would think that I'd be playing the guitar as a kind of demonstration, but it was actually more of out of awkwardness, really. And I do it on Zooms now. You know,
cradling it.
I don't feel particularly awkward with you right now. It's a different thing. But yeah, definitely, yeah. I'd definitely do that at home if there was someone around who I didn't really want to talk to.
It's a bit like it might be the equivalent for me. I wouldn't go into a pub on my own without a book. If I've got a book, I feel as if I've got a companion there. So I'm going into the pub with somebody, and I've got something to do. And without it, I would just feel very self-conscious sat there. But there's something non-threatening, I think, about a book, and also intriguing. And I think a book says you're a decent person. I think a guitar does as well. I might be wrong about that.
I know, I'm sort of thinking for examples now.
You can give me the list later.
But yeah, and it was very interesting for me, that, because I used to hang out in all these record shops. That was my circuit, me and my mates, a few times a week. Some of them were quite kind of seedy, but you'd see these like earnest young men who were a bit older than me, leafing through Burroughs and Philip K. Dick, and many of those older guys went on to be in bands, and you would...
Mark Smith was really into Philip K. Dick, wasn't he?
Mark Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Stephen Morris, I think, when Joy Division came out, I sort of recognised them, and I sort of recognised Ian Curtis from Rare Records, so these were sort of figures you would see around, and I associate, I guess, the counterculture, really, is what it was, with certain kind of paperback culture, really. Soaking that stuff up at 14, 15, it wasn't just all about guitar and records. The counterculture was another world there, really, that was illicit and was alluring, and it was, to me, was a kind of a universe of ideas. That's what it was. It was ideas you weren't getting in school, and you weren't getting it from people around you in school.
Wasn't it?
It was absolutely alternative. Yeah. Phil and Getty, all of that. That was all my introduction to it.
I think people forget that, back in those days, I mean, I came from a little village, and you just couldn't get stuff. You heard by word of mouth people talking about certain authors, certain bands. I'd go down to Huddersfield, they wouldn't be in the shops. You might find something on the market, one of these stores that you're talking about, but even a trip to Manchester couldn't guarantee you getting what you wanted. They just, we live in this culture now where you can get everything all the time, anywhere.
Yeah.
And it was utterly different there. I wanted to ask you, Johnny, there's this thing in medieval literature called the Wheel of Fortune, the Rota Fortuna, and it says that the wheel goes round and you go round on it and you get to the top, and after that moment you're always on the way down. You've had an amazing career since the Smiths. You played with the Pretenders, Modest Mouse, the Cribs. They're there. You've got your own, astonishing solo career. 99.9% of bands never really make it, certainly in the way that the Smiths made it. And by 85, 86, 87, you were in a band that was revered in the rock and roll world. Were you anxious when that came to an end, that you wouldn't know how to fill that void?
Yeah, I mean, before I left, I had to really look at the possibility that I was going to go back to living at my parents. I mean, that people might think that's me being over dramatic, but I'm not an idiot. So like taking yourself out of all of that, which was my dream, really. That was a dream come true in my band. I didn't want to look back and go, I didn't really want to have any sort of regret. So I just had to live
with your parents, financially or emotionally?
Yeah, well, no, financially, and going back to being on the dole. Wasn't that wealthy, but I had to work. What I knew before the Smiths was like, all right, I worked in clothes shops, but I was fairly skint, and just like a lot of young people, like trying to make a living or whatever, and getting buses and all of that. So I didn't expect that I was going to have a successful career. And a bit of that maybe was pragmatism, and it was terrifying. But that's how bad the split was. That's how bad it was. That I had to look at that possibility.
Quite wounding.
Yeah, I mean emotionally, yeah, definitely. But that's a whole different side of it now. Sam.
Well, were you worried that you wouldn't be able to reproduce the highs of being in that band and the adulation and the credibility that the Smiths had?
I think I had more pressing, immediate things on my mind, really. That was happening to me on a daily basis when you left the band. No, I didn't really think in those kind of terms, but I mean, one thing though is that my compass was always faced forward, say, right? And that had been forward from being 10 or 11. So that was never going to change. And that compass was trying to make great stuff. You know, so don't forget, for a few years before the Smiths, as young as I was, I'd been in little bands trying to, like a lot of people, but really trying to make it, but I was dead serious. So I've been in bands, I was in this band Sister Ray with adults, so, you know, and I joined them to learn my craft, you know, because they had a certain sound that I wanted to know about. So they rehearsed in the Whalley Range, the red light district of Manchester, and I went and joined a band of dangerous adults in a dangerous place, and that was when I was 15. So, you know, as young as I was when the Smiths split, it was too late for me to stop now. But whether I thought I was going to have success or not, I mean, I didn't think I was going to be as successful as the Smiths, no way. But the day that it was announced on the radio, you know, people started calling me up. But privately and inside, I had no idea what was going to happen.
You didn't know whether you had a future in the music industry ahead of you?
My thing was, and still is wanting to do something great.
Yeah.
You could say, well, it's all very well me saying this from a position of privilege, but you can do something great without being famous, which is good news for people out there who are very passionate. You can be an expert at what you do.
Yeah.
Invariably, I get asked from people who are struggling songwriters and really trying to make it, and a lot of them won't, you know, because it's so difficult. Particularly these days, it's even more difficult to make it as a musician for all kinds of reasons. But it is nice to be able to say, look, you know, no one's stopping you from being an absolute expert at what you do. And when you put your head on the pillow at night, that really counts for a lot. Mm. Particularly very young people want the golden ticket. How do you get in the music industry? How do you become famous? And it's like there's a doorway, you know. Certainly pre-social media times, that was definitely an idea, a paradigm, that there was this, you know, music industry was almost like a physical place with the keeper of the, you know, sort of like a Simon Cowell figure, several of them, which is in some ways true. But the people who have really excelled and certainly become very, very famous that come to mind for me, whether it's Bob Marley, John Lennon, David Beckham, on and on the list goes, they were all experts when they were kids. Mm. They studied it. I mean, the stories about Bob Marley being an utter pain in the arse on his very first sessions when I think he was like 17, 18, and saying the backing vocals are too loud, the backing vocals, because he'd studied the Coasters and he'd studied Sam Cooke and he'd studied the Drifters. He was like 17. And there are people who do that in all areas of life, certainly in the creative arts, and no one's stopping you doing that. So that was who I was anyway when the Smiths finished. All the things that you'd mentioned, I was in a revered band, very, very big music press band, which now I'm older, I think we could have done with less of that. No one's ever put that together, but I was there, and I think that was, I won't say it was our downfall, but I think it was a blind spot of the Smiths, being so occupied with the media and notoriety, particularly one certain member of the group. I think that could have been dialed down a bit and would have helped the group out. So that passion for, like you will have about writers and your craft, the way David Hockney is, he's a great example. As legendary and famous and wealthy as the man is, he will talk ad infinitum for hours about photography and 18th century painting. And he would always do that. So people who are great are really passionate.
Do you ever think about a time when you will stop? I mean, I once had a proper job, and the end point of that job as a probation officer in Manchester was, you know, sort of retirement, and that would be that career, that occupation finished. As a writer, I don't really know what the sort of end of writing looks like for me. Is it when my pencil runs out? Not a euphemism. Is it when I just don't have the thoughts, or I'm not interested in it anymore? Do I get too old at some point? to be a writer? Will somebody say to me, that's enough now, you've done enough? What does that future look like for you? Do you think you'll be playing that guitar to your grave?
Yeah, and in fact, I think when you get out of the public eye, you could argue that it gives you more time to absolutely really go through the stratosphere in terms of getting better. It does cross your mind. I'd be lying if I said it didn't, about what life would be like if you didn't do it when you got older. And now I think about it, I'm so fortunate that I have an awareness that there are people who really like hearing what I do, and they're getting older with me. We've gone through this thing together now. That I imagine that even if it's just a handful of them, it's worth sharing it, I think.
Yeah, well, I'll be there with them.
Well, thank you very much.
So we come now to our second and final feature of the show, which is the show and tell. You had the frog jumping into the pond noise last time, so just get the frog this time. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's all very high tech. Okay.
Well, your show and tell items have been with us all through the show. It's this guitar, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's by a British company called Auden, who were very kind. They made me this one-off 12-string acoustic. I was going to bring a teapot, seriously, because the show and tell. I thought, well, is it a bit obvious bringing a guitar? But the honest answer is that this is what's really got me through the last sort of 15 months, however long it is. So I thought, well, I won't overthink it. I wanted a new 12-string, and I wanted a black one, and they sort of made it to my specifications, and there's a thing that 12 strings do that regular guitars just don't, that kind of obvious sort of ringing out thing. That riff,
is it made to measure as a guitar?
It's not necessarily. I mean, guitars are, they are what they are, but there are some specifications of this that I had sorted out. I mean, the colour and the finish. There's a tendency, some modern guitar makers, to make things look distressed when they come out of the box, aged, in other words, right?
Pre-distressed.
And it always looks phony to me. I don't like it. So I was like, no, make me a shiny one, and I'll distress it. I'll put it through some distress. Over the years, I do that. Roadies or techs, people who've worked for me, especially if they haven't worked for me before, they're really alarmed at the way I treat guitars. I love them, but because I grew up in the 70s, literally there wasn't like fancy guitar, these fancy guitar stands and stuff, and I kind of like the look of him just sort of strewn around. So I'll distress this guitar. I don't mind guitars being beaten up and knocked and that they've had a life, So on.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so there you go.
My show and tell, in comparison, is going to look very mundane. So this is a photograph. Do you know what that is?
I know what it is. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it's GLC, right?
Yeah. So this is June the 10th, 1984. Jobs for Change concert in Jubilee Gardens in London. Yeah. I went up from Portsmouth Poly with some mates. It was the only time I ever saw the Smiths.
Yeah.
We might be in this same photograph. I went inside the GLC buildings and came out and sat on one of the ledges
so
there.
You were one of the nutters.
Well, I was on the window ledge, yeah. I wasn't one of those people throwing great reams of official paperwork out of the window, because the GLC was being disbanded at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I wanted to show you this, Johnny, well, apart from the fact, as I say, it was the only time I saw the Smiths, and
I remember it very well.
Yeah. Do you remember the violence that day? Because there was a band called the Redskins played from York, who were a left-wing...
kick over the statues.
Kick over the statues, yeah. And a bunch of right-wing skinheads turned up that day, and there were scuffles going on all through the day. And I was just thinking about how tribal music was then, how important it was to you, which clan you belonged to. You know, the badge that you wore on your lapel, the T-shirt that you wore. It was very important. You were part of a political family. You know, music had a really strong message, it seemed to me then, which I'm not sure it does anymore.
I think you're right, but they now tend to be much more splintered, I think, and more short-lived. But the thing is, I mentioned the music press before, but for such a long time, the music press not only informed, but gave a sort of sense of community for many, many years. I mean, I'm talking from the mid-70s, but particularly through that time. One of the good things about the Smiths being a music press band was that we really focused that, I think. So I'm often asked about politics. It's a bit of a blessing and a curse, but in our case, it was because the generation that I came out of were political just by definition, And what I often say is that, you had the music press and then you had all the bands, and we had this common enemy, which was the government, and we were literally on the same page, Obviously that was a concert for the GLC. Ken Livingstone was involved.
The stewards that day were Yorkshire miners. I'm
not sure that that kind of thing wouldn't happen now. I'm proud to have been part of a generation of groups, not just, it wasn't just the Smiths. Obviously Billy Bragg is a really...
He played that same day, didn't he?
Yeah.
Hank Wangford and Misty and Roots.
Well, I think the show was closed by Mary Wilson, actually.
It was, yeah. There's a picture of her stood next to Ken Livingstone with Morrissey on the other side of her.
Right, yeah, well, that's a weird picture, but it was a given that you were political. If you were in a band, that was a given.
And which side of the line you were on as well.
100%. They were your values. And, I've said this before, but back then playing Glastonbury was a political act. Yeah. There was no doubt about what you were doing. When the Smiths played it in '85, I think Elvis Costello was headliner, and he was an established pop star. But but by playing it, you were under no sort of illusions about what his values were, etc., etc. So it wasn't just about the music.
Yeah.
The tribal aspects of following bands, identifying with the people in bands and what they've got to say and the way they look and their backgrounds. They're some of the most fantastic ingredients that make pop culture and street pop culture so great.
No, it makes my heart pound looking at that photograph, thinking that I was part of a 100,000 strong family that day.
As soon as we came off stage, and I think even during a couple of songs, the band were all saying to each other, "Look at those lot up there."
Yeah, well,
you guys were the talking point.
Sorry about that. Oh, I'm glad I made it into dressing room gossip. I was talking about haiku and writing haiku, these little 17-syllable poems. So the form of the haiku, it looks like this. There's a line of 5 syllables, a line of 7 syllables, and a line of 5 syllables. And I've been writing one for every person who's come to the shed. So this is one I've written for you.
Thank you.
So this could be an excruciatingly embarrassing moment, me reading poetry to you, Johnny.
Well, shall I accompany? If we're going to do it, we're going to go all in.
That would be fantastic. Okay. Rose petal plectrums pull an old tune from the breeze, oscillate wildly. Perfect. That's for you.
Our first. Thank you very much. Is that? Oh, can I keep that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cheers, Sam. That's great.
And you have to give me the guitar now.
It's our first gig.
Thanks so much.
I'll give you that.
Oh, really? Oh, thank you. That's great. This is a plectrum. I have to call it a pick.
Call it a pick. From our first gig.
You can't call it a pick. Pick's only got 1 syllable. I won't be able to get that into
Plectrum's
the poem.
fine.
Okay, thank you.